The White House has given all federal agencies until 5 p.m. today to shut down their diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, websites, and social media accounts, and place all DEI-focused employees on leave ahead of eventual layoffs. The directive from the Office of Personnel Management also includes agency heads to ask employees about any efforts to disguise these programs by using coded or imprecise language. Joining us now, co-host of The Weekend at MSNBC and former RNC chairman, Michael Steele, and the New York Times opinion columnist, David French. Gentlemen, thank you so much. What is the goal? I'm going to cough. What is the goal here, Michael?
Oh, the goal is just to eradicate any effort that levels up, or touches on the idea of creating a space in which our institutions, particularly our government institutions, and public institutions are mindful of including everyone, creating that idea of access. And so, the federal government has always been at the vanguard of these types of initiatives. Sometimes a little slow to the game, we know historically, but nonetheless, the military is a very good example of that sort of forward-leaning, sort of into the cultural moment and recognizing the responsibility. All of that's an anathema to those who believe that these things impinge on the whiteness of America, and that somehow by elevating up individuals of color, you're taking away something from white constituents. We know that's not the case, but that is the belief. And so Donald Trump, again, leans into that, elevates it, gives it a voice. It cements further their support of him because he's embracing whiteness as opposed to Americanism. And that's how we get where we are.
I want to ask David about whether this does actually meet the goal of handing out merit-based assignments. And I want to preface it by saying that there is not a big argument out there that the way that the government was hiring was great, that they were doing a good job getting the best folks. I mean, your colleague at the New York Times on the opinion side of things, Ezra Klein, had a great podcast interviewing some experts in this about the way the federal government works and the way they hire and just the fact that the best people are not getting the jobs, not because they're focusing on DEI, but because they don't want to get, in trouble for making the wrong decision or in trouble for using their judgment. And it lays it out in detail, and I won't get into the detail, but go listen to the podcast. In this house, we're angry when government fails. It's from last November. It's a good one. I re-listened to it today. I understand the goal to try to make the federal government work better. If Donald Trump were attempting to do that, really truly attempting to do that, how might his administration go about things?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because critics of Trump don't always need to be seen as defenders of the status quo, because sometimes the status quo is not acceptable. It's just that Trump doesn't offer the right answer here. So yes, there is there are good reasons, as Ezra has laid out, as well as anybody, I agree with you, for being concerned about the way we hire, promote, retain inside the federal bureaucracy. As a veteran, somebody who served in the Army, I'm very familiar with military bureaucracy. And sometimes it can promote timidity, it can foster mediocrity, but you're not fixing that by getting rid of DEI. I mean, DEI is this giant boogeyman sort of in the right-wing imagination, but it is not the root of all bureaucratic evil. It's not even the root of most or even a significant portion of bureaucratic evil. And so, yes, if you are wanting to reform the federal government, you would want, I do believe, to make it easier to fire government employees. Mediocre employees can exist within the government for a very, very long time and accumulate an awful lot of power. I do think there should be more ability to fire, for example, at the same time that we robustly protect against race discrimination, gender discrimination, age, discrimination on the basis of disability, all of the federal laws that still are in force and that Trump can't get rid of by signing an anti-DEI executive order.
Is this the sort of thing, though, Michael, that plays well because people think that it's an easy bogeyman to say this is why nothing works, because we've stopped hiring the way that we should be hiring?
Yeah, no, David is exactly right about that, but there are ripple effects to all of this, and this DEI versus meritocracy is a false comparison. It's a false argument to make, because the presumption is that if you're embracing, diversity in your workforce, elevating up equality in your workforce, whether it's government or the private sector, that you're somehow, buying into this idea that these individuals are not worthy of the responsibility and the job, that they are not meritoriously considered. They have no value in terms of their merits. They're just picked because they're Black. They're just picked because they're white. They're inherently incompetent. That's the conversation. That's the piece that no one wants to dance on, but that's at the core of a lot of this bull around DEI. I mean, David's right. It has created a boogeyman, very much like CRT. You ask people, what is CRT? They can't tell you because they don't know. They've just been told that it's bad and that it somehow has to do with their white child being less than a Black child. So that's the thread that runs through a lot of this. And we've already seen the impact from the Supreme Court decisions on affirmative action. Institutions are now reporting that the enrollment of African American students in particular is halved in many cases. You mean to tell me those kids had no merit otherwise to be at these schools? The fact is they don't need to consider them anymore. They don't need to put them in the meritocracy argument or consideration, because then they don't have to dance with, oh, how many Black kids do we put in the freshman class? So that's the other side of this. When you take this requirement, if you will, which is really just kind of reminding you that there are very much Black and brown students who have the academic skills, the professional level of competency to do the job academically or to do the job professionally. But no one wants to be reminded of that, and no one wants to deal with that. They just want to take it out because, as David noted, that's the bad thing, and somehow it's going to correct, meritocracy is going to correct for everything else. And what we're already seeing with the numbers coming from Stanford and other institutions that have embraced this, this new approach, it's having an impact on who they're bringing into those classes and who they're hiring.
Yeah, and as David said, there's a difference between making a bogeyman, and as you're saying as well, and actually trying to affect the change that you say is your goal, to make it more merit-based, to make it function better, and that Democrats need to find a way to be against these policies without being defenders of the status quo. Gentlemen, Michael Steele, David French, thank you so much for joining us.